Hey, what's up, guys? This is Alex, and today I want to talk about compression, and I want to demystify the meaning or the purpose of this unit, which is often, like, beginners often tend to think like, oh shit, compression is what I need to make my track sound professional. Actually, no, compression is just another way to manage volume balancing without losing your head over your mix. So, I'm gonna talk today, like there are multiple ways in which you can use compression. There is multi-band compression, there is sidechain compression, parallel compression and stuff. And I'm gonna make videos about all of those things later on. But today I just want to talk about the basic concepts and the main concepts of how compression works and what these knobs are, blah, blah, how to use it and why. So, as an example, I'm gonna take the percussion of my Pirates of the Caribbean cover I'm working on. The compression modules are useful to reduce the dynamic range in an instrument or a song or in an audio file, audio signal of any kind. Now, the dynamic range is just the difference from the highest peaking volume to the lowest volume that audio signal reaches. So in this part, for example, the dynamic range is different from this hit here to this part here, which only has those thin percussion, you know? That's like this thing here is the dynamic range, pretty much. And with compression, you can decrease it. So you decrease the difference in loudness from the calmest part to, the difference from the loudest part to the calmest part. That way, it makes everything sound bigger. So here I have an example of this same percussion ensemble, heavily compressed, and I'm gonna play it and switch the two so you can hear the difference. So as you hear, like, your ear perceived the compressed example more loud compared to the non-compressed example. And that's exactly it. Like, there is less of a dynamic gap, less of a dynamic range, so you perceive the whole thing way more loud. And as you might have noticed, though, you also hear less contrast when the hits, like the percussive hits come in, compared to this. Like, there is almost no contrast here between loud and calm because we killed that dynamic range. Now, why should you do this? The reason why, like, you should not always use compression, and there are many ways of using it. You can use it, you know, with more, prominently. You can use it more anonymously and stuff like that. But the reason why you should use it is, again, to reduce that gap. And to do an example, it's pretty much like this. I read this on Reddit, and there was an example that went like, you know, when you were a kid and you watched television, you watched the cartoons, and maybe the volume was a bit low, so you increased the volume a lot in your television. When the advertisements came, the volume of the advertisements might have been way more loud than the cartoons. So you went for the remote and pulled the volume down, and, you know, turned the volume down like hell because you didn't want that television to blast at full volume. You know. So that action of lowering the volume yourself when the loud part comes, when the advertisement came, that's you applying compression to the signal. Now, the cool thing about compressors is that they do that automatically. You can use these parameters to decide when to make a compressor act. When to make a compressor act on the volume and how much to lower the volume and for how long. You know. So this is a compressor. Compressors tend to have these parameters: threshold, ratio, attack, release, and sustain. So actually, no, attack and release. Sustain here is a bonus. I'm not going to talk about sustain. Also, knee is a bonus. I'm not going to talk about that either. But if you want to learn more about this specific type of compressor, like the FL Studio compressor, which is the free limiter in the compressor mode, I suggest you to go and click on help. It's gonna open the instruction manual for this type of compressor. Although generally speaking, compressors tend to have these knobs like the gain, the threshold, the ratio, the attack, and the release knobs. Those are the main knobs you find on every compressor. So let's, for example, see how I managed to reduce the dynamic range with this compressor. So we have this, and we want to increase the volume of the lower, the thinnest percussive parts without making the big percussive hits too loud instead. So just increasing the volume is not good enough, because if I do it, like I did increase the volume in the compressor. So the first step I did was I increased by 7 dBs, the volume by 7 dBs, which makes everything more loud, even this. And that kind of unbalances the mix, because it leads to clipping and stuff, because this part was already loud, and I do not want to increase this part by 7 decibels, but I do want to increase every single other part in between. So one cool thing I could do is a volume automation, where I just increase the volume here, lower it here, increase it here. But as you can see, this part is very long, and it can get very tedious to do that. So I'm going to use a compressor. So I increased the volume by 7 decibels. Now, with the compressor, you can choose a threshold over which you can affect the sound. So I chose, I'm going to choose minus 3 decibels. So after minus 3 decibels, which is this blue line here, I can choose how much I want to affect the signal with the ratio knob. The ratio knob allows you to set a ratio or a proportion that the sound would follow after it gets compressed. So after this threshold, the volume is gonna be reduced on a proportion from 3 to 1. Like only the volume of the signal that goes over this threshold. That way, what happens is that everything gets boosted, even the percussive hits here. Although when this percussive section is going to go over this threshold, it's gonna sound much more attenuated. And you can see in the here, the white thing here is the audio signal, and the purple thing is how much boosted it is, And this green line pretty much is 0 dB, and you can see the signal is being boosted over 0 dB. The purple thing here goes over 0 dB, but it's getting compressed accordingly on our ratio. And the compression, you can see the effect of the compression here with this white line. So this is how much the volume is being lowered. And as you can see here, this was the part where we have the percussion hit, and it goes over 0 dB, and it gets compressed heavily. You see it goes very low, it brings it down quite a lot. So that way it prevents this sound to clip and to be too much loud compared to the rest. So as you can see here, we were able to boost the volume by 7 dB without going over too much in overall loudness. Now, we also have the attack and the release knobs, and those are pretty much modifiers. They allow you to modify the attitude or the behavior of the compressor. Now, the attack allows you to delay a little bit, the moment that the compressor acts upon the signal. If you increase this, the compressor is going if I increase this up to 1000 milliseconds, it means that the compressor is going to attenuate the sound with 1 second of delay or something like that. And the release instead allows you to choose how long you want the attenuation to last, even after the sound has gone lower, has gone down lower from the threshold again. So this is the release is useful if you have sounds that maybe if you have a reverb sound, or there is no reverb on this percussion. But let's actually try to because I'm using the limiter here, in the bus before it gets, in the percussion bus before it gets reverbed. But let's actually use a compressor on the master, so you can hear its effect on the reverb, because it's quite different there. So these were the parameters I set initially, or something like that. So you heard here when the the big percussive hit striked, you heard the air was quite strange, right? Like you hear that type of strange audio artifacts. Now this happens because when you put a compressor, or when you compress a reverb signal, you're also compressing the audio signal which propagates through the air in the reverb. You are compressing the reverb as well, the air. And the reverb is a sound that, it's much distributed and has a long release. So if you add, volume automation, like fast volume automation like this ones to a reverb sound, that's bad because you create those artifacts, which are terrible. So to avoid this, you can use the release parameter in such a way that the attenuation has a more linear character to it, and in such a way that it fades out a little bit more linearly, so you don't have this rough type of attenuation, but a more precise and more human type of attenuation. Now, the downside of that is that if you have a very long release, you also have, like, the attenuation takes longer to fade out. So even if your signal goes below the threshold again, it's still going to get a little bit attenuated because the attenuation is not over. So this is what it sounds like with a long release, which is a bit better than just a little bit though, because here we are only able to have 2 seconds of release max. And there surely are compressors where you can have a much higher release or much longer release, so that you can create an even more long curve of attenuation. But yeah, those, like in this example for the percussion, I just used the compression to increase, like I just wanted to increase the loudness. But say, for example, I just want to instead decrease the volume of an instrument in a certain part. So let's take, for example, the strings and the brass here. Say, for example, we have this part. So say, for example, here I'd like to decrease the volume of, not decrease the volume, I like the volume of the strings, but I think they get too loud and they, overshadow the brass. Now, one thing I could do is I just could do a volume automation again on the loudest part of the strings, or I could use a compressor and manage it in such a way to make sure that the strings get a little bit lowered once they go over a certain threshold again. This way, it's going to make the brass stand out a little bit more without getting overshadowed so much by the strings when the strings go wild. Like it's much more, like the brass is much more hearable when I enable the compressor instead of when I don't. Like, not that huge, there's not a huge difference because I didn't compress like hell, because again, I didn't want to compromise the sound of the strings. But this is just, little details that when added up together, they convey, like they allow you to have a more clearer mix, etc. But yeah, you can also compress a lot. And the problem is that that fucks up with the nature of the sound of organic instruments especially. So you need to be careful with this. That's the reason why I do not use a lot of compression in my tracks, and when I use it, I do it lightly. But in other realms of music, like in EDM and stuff, there's less need for realism, and there's less organic sound, so people compress like hell. That's where the motto "Do you even compress, bro?" came from. So I do compress though when I use synthesizers in my tracks, in my orchestral tracks, like I did, for example, in the landing. I have some synthesizers there, and to make them sound huge, I did compress them a little bit, to make them have that powerful sound straight away. And yeah, as I said in the beginning of this video, there are many types of compression, many of which I will talk about later on in other episodes. But in this one, I just wanted to point out and demystify, the compressors and what they are, how they work, etc. So they're just like, if you're a beginner, if you're just beginning with the compressors, you might want to just think of them right now as ways to balance your volume without having to write very long and detailed automations. Like, you can automate the act of automating the volume. Like, I know it sounds weird, but yeah, you get what you mean, I hope, after watching this tutorial. But this is such a strange subject that it's it's simple, but it's strange to explain. So maybe I didn't explain myself correctly, or maybe I did mistakes. So if you have questions, if you didn't understand something, feel free to ask them in the comments, or if you have some corrections to make, because we're all human and we make mistakes. And I'm sure, like in my tutorials, maybe sometimes I say things that are not completely correct, but this is what I like. The things I explain is my understanding of these things here. Maybe my understanding of compression is not as huge as my understanding of other things. So if I made mistakes, make sure to leave a comments to correct those, and so that we all learn together, Because making tutorials is not only an act of teaching others. By teaching others, you also teach yourself. So yeah, that will be it for this tutorial. Let me know if it helped you, and if you want to learn more about orchestral mixing or how to write orchestral music, there's other tutorials on this channel. Go check maybe the playlists, because there are playlists of tutorials, so you can go there and see them all in one bit without having to browse the whole channel, which is full of videos right now. And if you're new here, you might want to subscribe along with checking those videos out, because I'm gonna keep posting stuff for you guys to learn how to write this type of music and improve day by day, so you can sustain a music career as a great composer. So that will be it for this tutorial. I'll see you guys later.